Madame la Ministre, chère Elisabeth Moreno, chère Arancha Gonzalèz, Mr. Acting Dean of PSIA, dear Mark Maloney, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, dear friends. Welcome to Sciences Po. First of all, I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation to the 7th Annual Youth and Leaders Meeting, a unique international conference that gives students a central role in both its organization and the debate. And I would like also to specially thank the 30 volunteers in PSIA School to organize this meeting. Every year, the Youth and Leaders Summit brings together some of the world's most influential leaders to engage in dialogue with those who aspire to follow in their footsteps, or students. This summit is very special for two main reasons. The first one, for the standing and diversity of our speakers who come from all over the world. Second, for the dialogue the summit sets in motion between these figures and our students. Obviously, this dialogue between contemporary leaders and those who will soon be working with them is valuable for our students. It's a chance for them to take effective ownership of the issues they study in the classroom. But I'm also convinced that these exchanges have a great deal to offer the leaders we invite. Here, in discussing and being challenged by young people who come from every country, they get to encounter new visions of society, new ways of thinking, and new ambitions. In that way, transmission of knowledge is set in both ways, from leaders to students, from students to leaders. The summit, obviously, now is a kind of tradition. Because traditions don't build themselves, I would like to thank warmly the New York Times for supporting us with this event for the 5th year running. This tremendous partnership is a mark of the international influence of PSIA. I'm particularly pleased that Stephen Dunbar Johnson, the President International of the New York Times Company, will join us for some concluding remarks at the end of the day. The 2022 Youth and Leaders Summit will concentrate on a particular, complex, but critically important topic: inclusion for the common good, protecting the planet, and improving lives. This topic implies that processes and institutions which assure the equitable involvement of underrepresented sectors in society provide the most effective means to resolve complex issues for the common good. But does it hold true? To what extent do inclusive processes and institutions serve to resolve complex issues for the common good? What evidence is there that individual well-being depends on collective well-being across sectors and geographies? Last question, where can best practices be found, and to what extent can they be scaled up? For sure, don't be afraid, I will not try to answer all these questions myself. But I think I do have a very clear idea that we need to assume a complex approach which embraces, at the same time, every issue. This is the DNA of Sciences Po. This is the DNA of PSIA. And I think that following the topic of this summit, I think that inclusiveness needs to be tackled with the goal to protect the planet. No one should be left behind in the wake of environmental ambition. I would like to thank all the speakers for taking part in this summit, for sharing their thinking with us, and for their willingness to be challenged by our students. You need to challenge the leaders. It will be a success if you challenge the leaders. Finally, allow me to sincerely thank all the PSIA staff and the students involved. And I would like to have a last word for Fariba Adelka. As you know, this morning we are in a bright mood. But we cannot forget the situation of Fariba Adelka, researcher at CERI Sciences Po. Fariba has been detained in Iran for almost 1,000 days. She has been sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment after being tried unfairly. Just last week, we have learned with indignation, anger, and sadness that she has been jailed again. She has been jailed because of her researches, because of her work, because she's a scientific. She is really what we can call a scientific prisoner. And this is the reason why I would like to dedicate this summit to Fariba. We are really dedicated to demand her liberation, her freedom, and we have the idea that we need to gather all the communities in Sciences Po, abroad Sciences Po. We have a lot of discussion with the authorities, and this is really one of my priorities. This is really one of Sciences Po's priorities. Let me now hand over to the Executive Director, Mr. Marc Maloney, and I wish you an excellent summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathias. Let me add my very warm welcome to you all, distinguished guests, faculty members, colleagues, friends, and most importantly, students, who, as our director has just explained, are truly at the heart of every aspect of this summit. We're absolutely delighted that you're joining us both here in this prestigious amphitheater named after Émile Boutmy, who founded Sciences Po precisely 150 years ago. And of course, those of you, probably the majority of you, who are joining us online via Zoom or U2 Live. This is the first Youth and Leaders Summit without the man who launched it back in 2016, Enrico Letta, the former dean of PSIA, who returned to Italian politics last spring. And so I just want to take this opportunity to thank Enrico for his vision in creating what has become our flagship event here at PSIA. And I know that although he isn't with us today physically, that he's with us in spirit. It's my great honor to launch the 2022 summit in my capacity as acting dean of what is a truly remarkable school, with this compelling and complex topic and a smashing lineup of distinguished speakers. We're all in for a real treat today. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Elizabeth Moreno, who I'll invite up to the stage in 1 minute. Madame Moreno has spent most of her professional career in the private sector in various positions with France Telecom, the Dell Group, and the Lenovo Group, where she ultimately served as president and CEO of Lenovo France. Since July 2020, Ms. Moreno has been France's Minister for Gender, Equality, Diversity, and Equal Opportunities, which makes her the perfect person to kick off this summit with the opening speech. Madame Moreno, welcome to the stage. The floor is yours.
Bonjour. Dear Mrs. Minister Arancha Gonzalèz, dear Mathias Vicherat, dear Marc Maloney, ladies and gentlemen, dear students here in the room and all around the world, I am truly happy to attend this 7th edition of the Youth and Leaders Summit created in 2016 by Enrico Letta, who has left a strong mark on your school. And congratulations to Sciences Po and PSIA for organizing this important and necessary event. You have decided to dedicate this year's summit to inclusion for the common good, protecting the planet, and improving lives. I really like this theme because it allows us to cover the vast area of issues at stake in the world today, and many of these topics are at the core of my convictions and of my ministry. And these themes are extremely important for our country because they affect our cohesion and the defense of our French and European values. In fact, there is an urgent need to act and mobilize for inclusion, for equality, for solidarity, for protection against discrimination and disregard, and for the inviolability of human dignity. These are rights which do not apply to some more and to others less. They do not apply to some always and to others sometimes. These rights should apply to each of us. They should apply to everyone. And as stated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should all together act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. But we all know that the reality is different. Widespread crises tend to exacerbate inequalities of all kinds. And COVID-19 has been no exception. The most vulnerable people have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And we have seen topics such as gender equality, diversity, and equal opportunities coming at the center of the public debate at the back of the pandemic crisis. And this is a good thing because it means that society is ripe to address these issues that will contribute to define a better future together. Because the COVID-19 crisis brought to the fore and accentuated deep-rooted inequalities and discriminations. The concomitant rise of conservatism outside and inside some countries of the EU is creating a sense of urgency on these subjects. Let me be clear. It is okay and democratically healthy to debate some of them. However, it is not okay to go backwards on some fundamental human rights, and we will discuss these later on, I'm sure. First of all, I would like to speak about gender equality. In 2016, President Macron realized that although women and men are supposed to enjoy the same rights in our country, in reality, women have less power to exercise these in all the spheres of our society, be it in education, work, public space, etc., etc. Hence, he decided that gender equality would be the great cause of his mandate. And in the pyramid of needs, everything starts with the protection from physical violence against girls and women. As you all know, domestic violence can have devastating physical, economic, and psychological consequences for survivors, while control and abuse can make it difficult to sustain meaningful employment. Domestic violence is a major barrier to women's participation in work, education, training, and for women to progress in their career. Thus, there is no way to consider gender equality or economic emancipation, and I will speak about this later, without having covered that dimension first. This is why the fight against gender-based and sexual violence is the first priority of my ministry. Because yes, as Hillary Clinton said in 1995 in Beijing, women's rights are human's rights. Therefore, since 2017, because for too long there had been a collective silence on the failure to tackle the problem, France has set up a Grenelle against domestic violence to set up 53 concrete measures tackling domestic violence on women. And we have used many times the example of Spain that handled this problem for 15 years already. And I think for our country, never before in recent history had a French government put so much emphasis on that critical subject. And as long as we will have women or girls dying because they are girls and women, we will do everything we can to protect them. Education is paramount in the fight against stereotypes. It is the only way to fight patriarchy, as well as the self-censorship preventing girls from embracing their dreams. Because talent has no gender. There should be no studies or careers reserved to boys and to men, and society should develop a gender-neutral approach to these questions. For instance, we need to see more girls embracing STEMs. We need more Ada Lovelace, more Catherine Johnson, more Jennifer Doudna, and more Esther Duflo or Emmanuelle Charpentier. In short, we need more role models to show the way to the next generations of female leaders, because 1 out of 3 jobs that will be created in the 5 coming years will have a STEM component, and we want as many girls and boys to embrace these opportunities. The fight for equality continues when, among their newly formed families, young women tend to take a disproportionate share of the domestic burden. This is why we decided to double the length of the paternity leave from 14 to 28 days. This extension has 2 benefits. 1, it allows young fathers to spend quality time with their newborn babies and to contribute also to the family task and help their partners. And it allows also young mothers to stay away from their professional careers for a shorter time, which will reduce their professional risks as well. Finally, we also have a duty to protect women financially if their couple unfortunately had to dissolve, and to secure the payment of their alimonies that count for 20% of monoparental families. The French government is now guaranteeing that payment through a direct settlement system, hence creating a social safety net for single-parent families. I think these measures are key for gender equality and for women economic empowerment. But indeed, it is not enough. Women are not yet where they should be in decision-making. According to the World Economic Forum, it will take 257 years to close the economic gender gap globally. And even worse, this prediction was based on pre-COVID trends. One of the most powerful levers to accelerate towards gender equality is the economic empowerment of women. As Gisèle Halimi, a French lawyer and feminist, said, it is the key for women's freedom, because it will give them the means to be independent and to make their own decisions. France is now one of the leading nations when it comes to giving women access to the boardrooms, with 45% female representation among board members. How did we do it when many countries are saying it is impossible? By imposing a mandatory 40% gender representation quota to large companies through a specific law voted in 2011. Before this law, women were barely representing 10% of board members. Like the former European Commission Vice President Viviane Reding once said, I don't like quota, but I like what quota does. However, when it comes to executive committees, the progress is too slow, with a share of female leaders that has been stuck right below 20% for decades. How do we break this glass ceiling and we make this world more inclusive for women? The most important element to tackle is the root cause of the underrepresentation of women at the big table, which is the thinness of the female talent pools where the future corporate leaders are recruited. Just to give you an example, I have spent the 20 or so past years of my life in the tech world, leading the largest tech companies in the world. But I studied law because I wanted to become a lawyer. And now I'm in politics, just to tell you that nothing is impossible. I'm therefore in favor of setting precise, mandatory targets for companies which would help to get traction in that space. We have to count women to make them count. I firmly believe that increasing the share of women in the daily management instances of corporations is the only way to put gender equality at the center of all and any decision. I see these not only as a matter of justice, but also as a matter of economic efficiency. Diverse companies are stronger, and gender parity will provide a decisive edge in today's competitive environment. In these contexts, last year, the French Parliament voted in favor of a law establishing quotas to impose more women in corporate executive positions. I know, of course I know, that not a single woman wants to be hired because she's a woman, but simply because she's competent. But we see that without these laws, things are not moving fast enough. This law will mandate that companies with more than 1,000 employees will have to achieve a proportion of at least 30% female senior managers by 2027 and at least 40% by 2030. This law also includes measures aimed at addressing women's daily issues more widely. Indeed, in addition to quotas, it includes measures to fight gender bias, such as introducing an equality index in universities, along with more diverse juries. We want more girls to study in the male domain, and we want more males to study in the female domains. Again, jobs have no gender. Thus, I think this law is an historic step for French women and gender equality. Despite progress made in recent decades, it addresses a remaining lack of parity in the workplace and removes obstacles to women's economic inclusion. The glass ceiling, as well as gender gap, remain a reality that we all have to address together. And I think I am at the right place to start this fight. Still, regarding women economic empowerment, the French government set up the Professional Equality Index in 2018 in order to close the gender pay gap. Indeed, equal pay is a prerequisite to achieving any gender equality in the world of labor, as well as a more inclusive and a fairer world in general. Thus, the Professional Equality Index is about measuring equality in the workplace based on 5 indicators and aggregated scores. Thanks to this index, we are able to objectivate the situation and the existing practices, know where we stand and what still has to be done. The vast majority of companies comply with the obligation of publishing the index. Through this exercise, many companies realized how they actually performed in a very objective manner. The index is well accepted by most of the 50 and plus employees companies in our country. And above all, this index has become a tool for companies to advertise on their performance internally and towards possible recruits, and to attract talents who wouldn't have dared to address their companies. What is very encouraging is that the share of poor performing companies is decreasing. So we clearly see a positive dynamic, but we need to go further and faster. After France hosted the Generation Equality Forum last summer, gender equality will be an important topic under the French presidency of the European Union. I'm working closely with the trio of presidencies, France, Czech Republic, and Sweden, to give consistency to our common priorities. These priorities are thus economic empowerment of women, emphasis on the role of women in post-COVID-19 recovery, and prevention and fight against sexual and sexist violence. I hope we will make some concrete progress for all European women and above. With gender equality, inclusion for the common good is also the fight against all forms of racism anti-Semitism, and discrimination. Hate speeches can seduce and even inspire cynical maneuvers to instrumentalize our fellow citizens. History, unfortunately, records how these can lead to the most terrible dramas of our societies. I don't know if you've read last week an article saying that girls, starting at 14, are committing more and more suicide in our countries. And most of these suicides are related also to the way they are treated on social network. History, unfortunately, records how these can lead to the most terrible dramas of societies, as I said, and fighting against racism and against discrimination is more contemporary than ever, because we must remain lucid and realistic, because times change, hatred has also changed. It has changed its face, it has adopted new practices. But it did not diminish in intensity. The duty of all of us, politicians, but also citizens like you, is to continue the fight. The fight against racism is a deep-rooted policy in France. Our legal arsenal in this area is super consistent. Laws punishing racist behavior and hate speech were established in France from 1972. Since then, no less than 10 laws have enriched the legal framework. And as Minister for Equality, I am responsible for the fight against all kinds of discrimination. Combating discrimination is a top priority for our government in a holistic manner, irrespective of the gender. I'm thinking about LGBT plus people. I'm thinking about women, but also the disability you may suffer from, the social origin, or the skin color. All things that you do not choose, but things you may suffer from. As announced President Macron on the 4th of December 2020, the French government has launched last year a dedicated platform to tackle discriminations by February 12th, I think it was 12th, held by the Défenseur des Droits, a French independent authority, as well as a great digital citizen consultation on discriminations from April to May last year, as to offering to French citizens and associations committed in this endeavor to share their best practices or new ideas to tackle discriminations. Moreover, let me address the issue of social media, because that is a crucial question today, especially for your generation. They have become the playground for hateful and racist speeches. They are not opinions, but many crimes that are often perpetrated there. Crimes protected by anonymity. And we must therefore be adamant about racism and anti-Semitism that plague the internet, with a strong determination, as they mainly affect the younger generation who do not know how to defend themselves and are not prepared to defend themselves. The French government is determined to move forward on this subject, but the answer must also be taken to the European level, because like racism, social networks knows no borders. The future directive, known as Digital Single Act, one of the objects of which will be the regulation of content on social networks, will be a major tool in this fight. And finally, beyond combating discrimination, I also want to promote diversity in order to build a more inclusive society. This is why I have launched on November 17th, 2021, the experimentation of an inclusion and diversity index with 10 companies. This index aims to measure diversity in businesses and public service. Private and public actors have to pay greater attention to inclusion. And I deeply believe that tomorrow the most successful companies will be the most inclusive ones. And a resilient society is a diverse society. Dear students, as Sciences Po students, you are the leaders of tomorrow, with no doubt. The world of my generation bequeath to you is to rebuild. It is a big issue as well as an opportunity. And I am confident because we can all feel the increasing attention your generation is paying to equality, fight against racism, anti-Semitism, or discrimination at all levels, as well as, of course, climate change. I am confident because I'm sure you are going to achieve these objectives that our world desperately needs, with more equality, more inclusion, and more justice. I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions. Yeah.
So, good news that the minister has time for a couple of questions. So as you can see, we've got the 2 microphones set up on either side. In the interest of time, I would ask you please to keep your questions as short as possible. And if you could just say your name, the country that you come from, and what you're studying here at Sciences Po briefly as an introduction. So if there are any questions, please, we have 5 or 10 minutes to take them. Anyone willing to start? Please.
Thank you very much. Microphone working? Okay. Thank you very much for your opening speech. My name is Joanna O'Flynn. I study environmental policy at PSIA, and I am half German, half English. My question was, you talked about gender-neutral jobs, making sure that there's more women in male-dominated jobs, more men in also traditionally women-dominated jobs. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on how we can achieve that.
Is there a second question from the floor? Yes, please.
Hi, Minister. Hi. My name is Amanda. I come from China. I study international governance and diplomacy at PSIA. And actually, last year I took a gap year, and I used to work for Expo 2020 Dubai for the Women's Pavilion. So it's very much a pavilion dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment. And in my work, we hear so much about what needs to be done, and we all know. But as of now, and as of like the youth, our generation, what exactly we need to do on the hand, like on the ground, towards a more gender equitable future? Because we hear all the policy talk, but when it comes to individuals, what exactly do we need to do? And what do we need to tell the others who might not, who still think maybe gender equality is a women's only club, something like that? Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can. Joanna, to your question, I think, you know, we all grew up with the idea that some jobs are made for women and some others are made for girls. And I'm going to share, to respond to your question, some personal experiences so you understand where I come from. I grew up in a family where my mother simply wanted me to become a good mother, a good wife, a good spouse, and to take care of my family. And she never thought that I could become a businesswoman because nobody in her family before her had been a businesswoman. They barely knew what business meant for women. And I grew up with this idea that women were made for jobs related to people, you know, like working in hospitals, working in education, all these jobs where you need to take care of people. I love taking care of people. I love taking care of people. but I loved business as well. And when I started saying that I wanted to do business, everybody around me told me, seriously, that's not for women. And it took me years to fight against my own bias that came from my environment, because usually your bias and stereotypes come from the people that you trust the most, right? Because they tell you what is good for you. And I think the hardest battle that we have, and this goes also to Samantha's question as well, we not only need to educate our young girls and tell them that every job is made for everyone that wants to make that job. If you feel it, if you feel your passion for that job, if you dream about it, don't let anybody stop you from doing that. Anybody. It might be difficult, it might take you some time, but our life is too short, you know? So if we start at the younger age, and if we educate parents, and we tell them that jobs have no gender, and if we show girls and boys, starting at the college, college in English is, starting at the bachelor, and you show them all the possible jobs in the world, and you give them the chance to try, you know. I think in France we start training our young girls and boys at the level of troisième, at the end of a bachelor. This is too late. You should start doing these things at the earliest age possible, and you should work with education, you should work with teachers. I have met some teachers who tell girls, be careful, this job is more for men, and you will struggle in this kind of role. So we need to educate. Indeed, we have the laws, but the laws sometimes do not apply, as we can realize every day, because people do not apply them, because sometimes stereotypes are stronger than laws. So we need to deconstruct all these thoughts about what is made for male and what is made for women. And I really believe that, you know, if 50 years ago or so, or 100 years ago, some jobs were not possible to everybody, nowadays, thanks to science and technology, everybody can do everything. I can tell you, believe my personal experience, everybody can make everything, provided you put the right attention, the right passion, the right energy, the right amount of work. Everything is possible, and that's where we should all start, and we should explain to parents, and we should explain to teachers, and then things will become easier in the longer term. Does this respond to your question? Thank you, Joanna. Samantha, at the individual level, and you mentioned it, where are you? I think, and again, I think it's related to what Joanna asked. I'm going to give you an example of sometimes the limitations of law. The first law for equal pay between men and women, equal salary, was made in 1972 in France. More than 50 years later, 50 years later, we still have 16% gap salary between women and men. But the law exists, and we have many laws in place. But here again, if individuals do not feel accountable, and when I think about individuals here, on this example, I'm thinking about CEOs and managers and human resources. If they do not decide that it is time to make these changes, nothing will happen. And some of them are ready to pay penalties just because, oh, come on, that's not my priority. You see what I mean? So that's the reason why this question of inclusion is so hard, because it starts with your mindset. It starts with your values. When I was the CEO of Lenovo was the leader of hardware business in the world at the time, and it's a tech industry, right? So when I took my position, I said, I want, as many women and men in my executive committee. And everybody told me, you will never, ever make it happen. Look at the other companies. We only have 30% women in tech. How will you find 50%? I said I want it. And I told my HR people, when I have a job at the exec committee, if you do not provide me at the end of in the shortlist, one man and one woman, I will not speak to them, because I want, each time we will open a job, I want one man and one female in the shortlist. They said, we will not find it. And guess what? I did it in 1 year. 1 year, for 2 reasons. The first reason is because I was one of the very rare women leading a tech company. All the good women who were working in this environment wanted to work in that company because they expected that I would help them. That's a reality. That's the reason why role models are so important. When you succeed, you need to show others how they can succeed. You know, and it takes nothing to men, because it was not recruiting women for women. It was recruiting competence. And women do not lack competence. They just lack opportunities to show how good they are. You see what I mean? So it has to start with your values. It has to start with focus, because I also meet many colleagues or men who tell me, of course I'm an inclusive person. Look at my company. I have as many men and women. And I ask them, where are these women? Tell me what their position in the company is. And they suddenly realize that yes, they have women, but not in the top positions. So I think it's really something personal, something that you can learn at school, but not only at school. You can learn it in the media. I think media have a strong responsibility to show a more inclusive world, a more diverse world. Again, we need to work on parents, we need to work on CEOs, we need to repeat and repeat and repeat again how diverse environments are beneficial for everybody, everyone. You know, if you spend your time with an handicapped person, you will understand what this person is suffering. If you spend your time with a woman living violence, you will understand that it can happen to you as well. If you spend your time with a black person, with an Arabic person, suddenly you will open your mind to other cultures. And if you have a company where diversity applies, you are more creative, you are more innovative, and you enrich yourself as an individual and your organization. And nowadays, with all the struggles we are facing, if we do not address all the problems we are facing in the world together, as Martin Luther King said, either we learn to live together as brothers, or we will die together as idiots. It's our choice.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Minister. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm allowed to have a follow-up comment or question.
I think we've sadly run out of time
Okay.
because there's another panel immediately after.
She's at the mic, so please go.
Okay.
Okay.
Minister overrules.
Very short.
I'm so sorry. I'll try to make it quick. So it's fascinating to hear. First of all, thank you for your answer. Fascinating to hear that you were at a very high position in the private sector as well, and now you're at a ministerial level in the public sector. So now, as a policymaker, what is your stance, or how are you involving the private sector to together, collectively working on one agenda? So for example, we talk about at the UN on governmental level, generation equality and all this agenda, but they're very much
short.
Sorry. They're very much public focused, and what's your stance on involving the private sector?
That's a very good one.
Thank you.
I think, I'm going to tell you what I did. I joined the government in July 2020, and in the ministry I'm in charge of today, nobody had built a strong relation with companies, for instance. But if you really want to make huge changes and in this economic empowerment of women, you have to do it with companies, right? So the first thing I did, I set a workshop with the largest companies in our country those where we had the lower number of women. I don't know if you know, but in France we have 43% of companies that have 0 or 1 woman in their top 10 salaries. 43%, almost 1 out of 2. So I met with the CEOs of those companies and I told them, look, we're not going to lose our time. You're not going to try to explain to me what a company is, because I spent 30 years of my life in companies. I just want you to tell me why the situation is what it is in your company today. And then I want you to tell me what action plan you are going to implement to change this in the coming years. And you have 2 choices. Either you present a solid and bold plan, and we move together and we show what you are doing, or, I mean, let me make it simple. I said it will be a blame or shame strategy. If you do well, I'll make sure that people know that you are doing well and you are taking your social responsibility. If you do wrong, I will tell people that you are not doing the right thing. And you know, companies are very, very, very careful to their reputation nowadays. They don't want to be on the press, on the media, as the company who does not respect diversity. And it worked pretty well.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much again for being with us today.
It was my pleasure, and I can't leave you guys without telling you that this world is not an easy one. No. I'll finish on this world, but it's important. I think transmission is important. This world is not an easy one. I can tell you that I have lived all kind of discrimination that you can imagine. I'm a woman, I'm black, I have an handicap, I come from very, very, very modest beginnings. I have lived all kind of discrimination. But I want to tell you something. You may not choose how you are born, where you are born, and how you start your life. But it is your choice to choose what you want your life to become. It is in your power. And once you will have succeeded, because I'm sure that if you put the right passion and the right energy and the right focus in your life, you can succeed. Never, ever forget to return what life has given you as good. Thank you very much.
Let me now invite to the stage Arancha Gonzalèz, who's with us here in the amphitheater, and on screen, Federica Mogherini, who will join us as well, as we are about to start our first keynote panel of the day. Thank you again, Madame la Ministre. There's Federica. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you, even if at distance, unfortunately.
So I was going to start by doing a formal biography of our 2 speakers, but in the interest of time, they're in your programs, as long as our speakers don't mind cutting to the chase and starting straight away our panel. What I'd like to do is to ask Arancha Gonzalèz maybe to start, and she's going to paint a bit of a macro level picture about interdependence, including why being a good citizen and pursuing the common good are largely questions of self-interest. So without further ado, Arancha.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks a lot to PSIA for this great invitation to debate on a topic that is essential to all of us and to the societies and to democracies in which we want to live. This is the essence of today's discussion. And it starts with a common good. And it looks at the common good from 2 points of view. One is the planet. Obviously, one of the biggest threats to our common good is life on this planet, is our collective fight to ensure life on this planet remains possible for future generations. And the second one is about inclusion, which is about the strength of our societies. the ability we will have to leave no one behind, to use the parlance of the United Nations. So these two are essential ingredients to this notion of common good. Before I talk about interdependence, I want to shout out for Fariba and follow what Mathias Vicherat was saying a moment ago. Science is not a threat. Science is one of our most precious common good. And if we needed an example, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, relying on science to help us address it. So I want to kindly ask the Iranian authorities to free Fariba, who is an example of a scientist that is providing all of us with a common good. Now, common good in the current world we are living in, a world that is very much dominated by two forces, is a difficult task. The first force is power. Power has returned to international relations with enormous force. International relations was always about power, you will tell me. But what is different today is that power is the predominant factor in international relations. We are living in a very geopolitical times. Just open the newspapers, just put on your television, and you will see what this means. But in this very power-driven world, we also know that our world is interdependent. We're not independent. We are interdependent. We also know that solutions will only come from international cooperation. They will only come from dialogue. They will only come from discussion. They will only come from talking to each other. And this is what the two challenges you've put on the table have in common. Whether it's climate change, whether it's inclusion, we need strong, multilateral, global, international, you name it, cooperation. Talk, discussion, frameworks, laws, rules, norms, transparency, due diligence. We also, of course, need governments, citizens, civil societies, businesses to act at the national level. And we also need engaged citizens. These are the three components that the two challenges that you've put on the table, Mark, for our discussion today require. International cooperation, national strong action, and engaged citizenship to address them. Now, let's not be fooled. Some will tell you that what counts today is very strong national solutions only. I think this is wrong. And we have to fight against that. In a much more power-driven world, you are, in a way, the example. You are the students of international relations. The basic functioning ingredient of international relations is that there be engagement at the international level, at the multilateral level. I wanted to start here, Mark. Obviously, we are going to dive into inclusion and we're going to dive into climate change in a dialogue now. But I think the picture is one of interdependence. The picture is one of needing international multilateral cooperation. And the picture is we want to do this not just because of the moral imperative. And at the end of the day, there is a moral imperative. The minister was saying this a minute ago. We've said we would do this because it's basic rights, everyone's rights. But if you don't believe in moral imperatives, do it for your self-interest. At the end of the day, inclusion and climate change also have in common that if we tackle them, we are going to be much better off as societies, as businesses, as families, as individuals. So Mark, with this, over to you, and obviously looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Arancha. Let me now ask Federica Mogherini, who's joining us from Bruges at the College of Europe, to speak briefly on, share some of the micro-level anecdotes related to gender, inclusion, and diversity, and how these can benefit the common good. Federica.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, Arancha. Great to be there with you. Again, apologies if this needs to be done online today. Hope we will have other opportunities to meet in person soon. And thank you, Arancha, for this wonderful starting picture that I think makes my job much easier now, my task much easier now, because I fully subscribe to all you've said, and I couldn't say it better. If we want to dig a little bit more on inclusion and diversity, and maybe take it an anecdotal approach to that, let me start exactly where I am at the College of Europe, to share with you that this year, the College of Europe, I choose for the College of Europe a patron de promotion that is quite peculiar, given the history of the college. As you know probably very well, the College of Europe is a postgraduate Center of Excellence on European Studies, and we normally have every year a patron de promotion that gives the name to the promotion of the year. That is someone that has had an impact on the European integration process. And I looked, as soon as I arrived as a rector here, I looked at the precedents, and I found out that the large majority of the patrons in the past were men. And that we always refer to the founding fathers of our European Union. I wondered, don't we have any founding mother? Don't we have any role model, which the minister was so well referring to, that can show us that women have always been there, but have not been highlighted in the course of history, including in Europe, which is supposedly one of the places where gender and inclusion are looked at in the most attentive way. And this year I choose a patron that almost no one knows, a Belgian lawyer that passed away a few years ago, Eliane Vogelpolsky, that has dedicated her life to the gender pay gap, and in particular to develop one of the articles of the Treaty of Rome that creates the basis for gender equality treatment in the salary policies. And that has run many cases on this, many of them very famous, leading the way somehow to match treaties, institutional documents and processes to real life of workers and citizens. And I thought that this was a great example for our students, and I imagine also for the students that are there in the room and connected online following us, to say something that somehow echoes what the minister has said just before, and what Arancha was mentioning about the power of citizenship. You need international institutions and laws and norms and rules, and I would say schemes. You need a framework at international level, a global level. Now it's more evident than ever. You don't save yourself if you don't manage to save the rest of the world as well. That's true for climate, that's true for the pandemic. You need good policies at all levels, including at national and local one, but you need citizenship. And the citizenship makes you powerful no matter what you do. You can be powerful as a minister. Arancha and I know that. Sometimes you also have some frustrations. You can be powerful as a prime minister, as a president, as a member of parliament, but you can be very powerful as a lawyer, as a teacher, as anything you do in life. And you have a responsibility to contribute to the common goods because it's your own good. If your neighbor has a problem, you have a problem as well. This is, I think, the new reality we're waking up to, hopefully. And you also have responsibility in being a role model for that. And in particular, I would say when it comes to diversity and it comes to women roles in society and in foreign policy, again, Arancha and I have experimented that. I think we have a responsibility to show that what the minister just mentioned, you can do anything in life, provided that you put passion, energy, and commitment and dedication to it, provided you work hard. This is true also for, not also for women, actually this is true for everyone in society. And this is why I believe very much in the power of example and role models. One of the things I've done that I'm most proud about is showing a picture. We did it during my mandate as a representative, showing a picture of all the women foreign ministers in the world. And that picture, so colorful, so different from the pictures, the family pictures you normally see of all men, all 60 plus years old, all gray. That picture was giving the sense of a different way of using and interpreting and even visualizing power. And without being afraid of saying the word power, because power comes with the possibility to change and the possibility to exercise your responsibility as a citizen or in a public role. So I really believe that we collectively do have a responsibility not only to follow our path and to do what we believe we can do best to contribute to the common good and the society at all levels. It can be in your neighborhood, it can be in the United Nations system, wherever. Big or small, everything is big. And also to tell our friends, our kids, our parents, our relatives, our colleagues, that everyone has the power to do what they are passionate about and what they can contribute to. It's hard work. Nobody knows that better than students. But I think that this is the mission of our generations, to empower people to be themselves and to contribute to the common goods with all the power and instruments they have. I stop there, Mark, because I'm aware of time constraints we have. So looking forward to continuing our conversation now.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's a fantastic opening by both of you to get the discussion started. We're just going to exchange a few more minutes here before we open up to the floor. So obviously start thinking about...
I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? We'll make sure that we can get Federica on sound as well.
Yes. Now,
okay.
yes. Thanks.
Okay, good. I was just saying that it's a great start from both of you. And what we'll do is we'll continue discussion just a minute longer between us before opening the floor to questions. So I'm asking the students to start thinking already about some of the questions that they want. But maybe to start with, I'd like to go back to the point about multilateralism and how we can't just act nationally in our country silos, that really to address the biggest challenges of the day, most obviously protecting the planet, has to be done in multilateral arenas. And I know that both of you are two of the 58 strong network called the Global Women Leaders Voices that advocate for change and inclusion, and that you emphasize the importance of multilateralism to protect the planet and indeed to improve lives. And I wonder if you could start by maybe one than the other, giving some examples of the best practices of where there have been genuinely inclusive processes in the multilateral sphere that have effectively resolved complex societal issues for the common good. So maybe we'll start with Arancha.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we always hear is that multilateralism, the word is already a little bit convoluted, that multilateralism is slow, that it's complicated, that it's difficult, that it doesn't work. But in reality, it does. It's just that you have to invest much more time and energy and effort, and you need to be ready to dialogue with the other, not just to impose your vision, but also be ready to listen to what the others have to say, which is how the world works, right? If we want to address issues that have a transnational dimension, if we want to reduce CO2 emissions, it's not enough that we have a very smart policy at home to reduce emissions. We need to make sure that all other big emitters in the world help us in this effort. This is what multilateralism is about. You're right that together with 50 plus women leaders in international organizations within the UN network, we founded Global Women Leaders in order precisely to be an advocate for multilateralism. Let me give you an example of an incredible process in the United Nations that is bearing fruit. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals. You've all heard about them, you've seen the pin, but this is not just a pin, it's a process. It's all nations in the world seated around the table to discuss what are the main goals that the world should set in order to address the main challenges that we have, from eradicating extreme poverty to ensuring equality between men and women, to reducing CO2 emissions, to protecting our oceans, to ensuring everyone has the right to food, and the list goes on. This is what the Sustainable Development Goals are about. And they, first big, incredible success, we agreed on the goals. We put on a transparency, or countries put on a transparency mechanism to make sure that it's not just goals, but there is a way to measure them. It's becoming a bit loud, but never mind. And a commitment to ensure that countries remain on track to meet those goals. the Sustainable Development Goals, I would put, Mark, as a good example of the United Nations being the countries that are the United Nations, working for the first time with businesses, with civil society, and with citizens to make sure we have a plan to achieve those goals by 2030. Now, yeah, it's difficult. Yes, it's complicated. We heard this from a national perspective. Imagine how difficult it is at the international perspective, but it's the only and the most effective way.
Thank you very much. Federica, same question to you about multilateralism and what have you seen to be really the best practices of inclusive processes? Sorry, the floor is yours again, Federica.
Great, thanks. Once again, I fully agree with Arancha. There's no surprise. But the point is this: multilateralism is cumbersome, difficult, lengthy, frustrating at times. Obviously, if you take a decision, if you get to take a decision at 10, 28 or 27 in the European Union, for instance, or 100 plus in the United Nations system, it takes more time, it takes more work, it takes more patience, but it gets things done. Because once you get to a decision, then first of all, you have more assurances that that decision is going to be followed up and implemented, because there's ownership decision. And sometimes you take a decision unilaterally or bilaterally, and then you don't have the involvement of the implementing actors on the ground to make it real. Think of the so many peace agreements that were sometimes concluded bilaterally, and then without the involvement of different players, for instance, on the ground at local level, they didn't work simply because there was not enough ownership at multilateral level, not only internationally, but also locally, to make it real. In this respect, maybe I will share the two most powerful, for me personally, the two most powerful multilateral processes I've participated into. Have been, the Iran nuclear deal for sure, a great example of how the UN system and the EU system have worked well together, because not many know, but maybe students of international relations should, that the Iran negotiations actually are mandated by the UN Security Council, that identifies the High Representative of the European Union as the facilitator and identifies the formats of the negotiation. So that was a system where the UN Security Council, back in 2003, indicated the formats, the topic, the facilitator of negotiations. Then after more than 10 years, a solution was found on the basis of which implementation was guaranteed. And then a unilateral decision taken at the time by the Trump administration actually destroyed a multilateral solution that was working at the time. And now the international community is trying to restore some multilateral agreements to revive the results that were achieved back then. So this is, I think, a perfect example that shows that, yes, it took 10 years plus, but it led to a solution that was implemented and then actually turned off by a unilateral. Another smaller scale, much smaller scale example I can give is actually a project that I find extremely exciting, encouraging, that I started when I was High Representative, but now we're continuing also with the College of Europe. And this is a process of facilitation of dialogue among Syrian women to try and facilitate the end of the conflicts and the reconciliation process once the conflict will be ended. Low profile, no headlines, no visibility almost at all, in parallel with the UN negotiations, but empowering those, first of all, women voices across different parts of the country and outside the country, different backgrounds, but empowering those that have as an interest the fact that the country at a certain moment manages to start working together again from, the local services, the schools, the families, the community level. And I was part of many of these meetings, smart women, and I was impressed because I was participating, obviously, at the multilateral negotiations at official level. And there you see one kind of dynamic. And then you see the multilateralism applied to civil society that is also extremely powerful. And it was so exciting to me to see women coming together in that case that had as their only goal finding common solutions. So I think that multilateralism definitely is, first of all, the instrument that works better for achieving solutions, for implementing solutions, for guaranteeing that they are stable and long-lasting over time. But also, I think multilateralism is the only instrument that allows us to empower people, which is, at the end of the day, as Arancha was mentioning in the very beginning of our conversation, the most important factor if we want to tackle our problems of today's world.
Thank you very much. Maybe our last question to each of you before we open the floor. Just very conscious, of course, that in front of us and joining online are students who, as we heard in Mathias Vicherat's introduction, are obviously aspiring to become the leaders of tomorrow. And what advice would you give them in terms of what they can be doing now to prepare as best as possible, to not just to face, but to overcome some of the challenges that are likely to still be there as they start to move into the world of multilateralism, national, but also to, of course, in international organizations and non-governmental organizations. Arancha.
Conviction, backbone, clear stance, the belief that you can change things. Now, the change can be small, the change can be medium, the change can be big. Sometimes you will take 2 steps forward and we will move back 1 step. But if you have a strong convictions, and at the end of the day, this world is about strong convictions, and this is what you will gain in places like PSIA. I mean, I've been on the other side, just like where you're sitting today, not here in Paris. I did this in Madrid, but I know that the thing that drove me most to my career, mostly in the bit in the private sector, but mostly in the public sector, whether it's at the European public sector, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and then back to Spain as foreign minister, is the conviction that I could make my contribution to change, and to change in a better direction. That's, at the end of the day, I think what we always have to have in mind is not just earning a salary, it's good, it's not just having a job, it's having a purpose. And I think that is what matters in today's world.
Thank you. And Federica, to you as well, what advice would you offer?
I would start with a very similar thing that and one Arancha mentioned, passion. Do what you think is right. That allows you to overcome frustrations, setbacks, passion. Do what you like to do. This is a small advice, follow your heart and your passion. Even if people around you tell you that this is not a very good sector for professional careers, do what you're passionate about, because this gives you an energy that others don't have and helps you in the moments of difficulty. And always keeping in mind that there might be easy decisions and more difficult decisions, but if you try to follow what you believe is the right thing to do, you will always manage to sleep at night and wake up with the same energy and restart the action the following day. I would add maybe a couple of more concrete advices, because this is a question I discuss often with my students here in Bruges. Be patient. Be patient, because there will be times when results will not come. There will be times when you feel people don't understand you. Be also open and ready to listen and to change your mind if needed, to adjust, to calibrate action. Take into consideration that there might be times where your leadership is needed to be strong, but there might also be times when you need to, I call it with my team, I always called it to go submarine. There are times when you need to let it go and then to build the conditions that will allow you to continue, maybe in a different way, on a different path. So be patient, be open to listening also, to change your mind if needed, not on the fundamentals, but on the tactics, on the way to get where you want to get. And also try to be kind to people. I think we have sometimes an idea of leadership that is combined with, let me use negative words, arrogance and strength meant as imposition on others. I think there is a great lesson that many are teaching us in these times. And let me mention one for everybody. David Sassoli, that passed away a few days ago, being still the president of the European Parliament, was so strong in his determination and convictions, but always with a smile, always with a listening attitude. Be kind to people. Don't think that smiling and being nice to the people around you is a sign of weakness. It's the contrary. Being too aggressive is a sign of weakness because it means you fear the other. You fear that your ideals, your convictions are not strong enough to be taken care about if you don't impose them. Be open, be nice, be strong with a smile. Your leadership doesn't need to be imposed with the force. Sometimes you might have to have some fights, but go back to the smile because you might have the capacity, you might develop the capacity with knowledge, which is the basis of it, to lead with a smile and with an empathic style. This would be my practical advice.
That's very, very good advice. We'd now like to open the floor up to students here for your questions. Again, there are 2 mics. If you could just go in front of the mics, please, to ask your questions like we did last time. Just briefly say your name, the country that you're, or nationality that you have, and the program that you're studying. And if you can keep your questions short, that would be helpful to take as many as possible. We have, I think, until 10:40 when Federica has to leave us. So we're going to try to take a series of 2 or 3 questions. And if we've got time, we'll try to take 1 or 2 more after that. Please, the microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Bengi Shinik from Kosovo. I'm second-year master student at International Security. And my question will be to Ms. Federica Mogherini and about more traditional ways of security, which you mentioned that once a neighbor is in danger, so we should be part of the problem, feel as a part of the problem. And I want to ask about when a potential aggressor threatens a particular global or regional security as a public good, and when the major actors of status quo are not willing to take the risk of war to deter the main aggressors, what do you think your vision for Europe in this case would be to provide the necessary means and intentions on deterring the potential aggressors that can differentiate today's world from 1910s and 1930s when deterrence failed majorly? Thank you.
Any other questions from there? I'm just checking to see if we can get, please, if you could just stand in front of the microphone just behind you. And ask your question. I'm also checking to see if we can take questions from our friends online. There's over 100 people who have joined us online as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello. Oh, sorry. So, my name is Valentina. I'm Italian, and I'm an exchange student here at Sciences Po. So first, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here and discuss such important issues with Ms. Mogherini and Ms. Gonzalez. And we are talking about 2 very important issues, equal rights and climate change. We know that certain parts of the world suffer from this issue, let's say, more, despite being global issues, as we said. We see that with migration due to climate change, COVID, vaccinations, and women's rights. Do you think that the international community is doing enough to help these parts of the world? Because sometimes I feel like that the international community only looks sometimes at the West and sometimes leaves behind other parts of the world. But as we said, if we don't fight these issues together, we might not reach the goal. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other final ones here right now? Please. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Excuse me.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Juliet. I come from Mexico. I'm a first-year master student in international relations. And, well, you were discussing how international relations are very much driven by power today. So, well, the first question was partly answered by, with the best practices discussion, but how to overcome the existing power relations within multilateralism. And my second follow-up question is, I remember discussing in one of my classes that perhaps the big divide in international relations today wasn't between rich countries and poor countries, but between the global rich, who are those polluting the most, who are those who have the most control over social media, etc., and the global poor. So I was curious to know what you thought about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Federica, were you able to hear those questions?
Absolutely,
Okay,
yes.
we'll start with
Exciting
you.
questions. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, I would say that the second and third question have, at least from my point of view, an answer that is interlinked. And this refers to the big question, and maybe I would leave that a little bit more to Arancha and tackle the first one maybe more. But the second and third question relate to how do we make sure, if we can, if we manage, that there is a certain inclusivity and effectiveness in the way in which the international multilateral system works, whose interests are represented, which dynamics are empowering the right players that need to be empowered at different stages and on different topics. I have to tell you, this is one of the issues where I experienced most of my own personal frustration when I was in office, because it is true that the multilateral system is today more needed than ever. Never in our history, of the global history of human beings, a well-functioning international multilateral system is as needed as it would be today, because of the challenges we're facing, climate change and the pandemic, but also the economic dynamics. I mean, let's not forget that just a couple of decades ago, or even 10 years ago, even less, we were in the middle of an economic and financial crisis, a little bit wherever in the world, in the Eurozone in particular. So we are in desperate need of functioning, inclusive multilateral institutions on one side, and on the other side, we see that sometimes multilateral institutions are blocked by the power games that Arancha was describing in the beginning of our conversation. How to overcome that mechanism, that blockage, is still not tackled effectively, in my opinion. And that, I hope, would require and would rely on the wisdom, the knowledge, the fantasy, also the creativity that I hope your generation will manage to put into a proper reform of the national multilateral system that I think is quite urgent. Because it is quite clear that the Security Council is not a functioning, efficient mechanism to solve conflicts and crises around the world, at least not always. It is clear that sometimes power considerations of short-term nature prevent the multilateral system or the national governments in the multilateral system to take responsible decisions for the long term, and so on and so forth. So I think this is quite urgent. On the first question, deterrence, I think, is today more important than it used to be one century ago. And it is also what functions better at the end of the day. I have to say the European Union in particular has quite good instruments to use when it comes to deterrence. Not only and not so much on the security and defense level, even if I'm quite proud to say that during the last few years, the last 7-8 years, we have increased enormously the security and defense capacity and capabilities of the European Union, which I think is something needed in cooperation with NATO, in partnership with NATO. By the way, Spain has played a great role in that. I have to say with the last several governments, not only the last few years, but leading the way. And that is for sure one element, not only of deterrence, but also prevention, that I think is even more effective than deterrence. But then there are a number of other instruments that are the persuasion instruments that can be applied, again, especially in the multilateral system and especially at the regional level, think of the European Union. This can be conditionality policies, it can be sanctions even. I'm not a big fan of sanctions, but they can work in some conditions, in some situations. Incentives. I normally like more the incentives policy also as a deterrent rather than a sanctioning policy, because I think that's showing what you can get if you behave, if you follow certain rules and norms, is a better way to win the hearts and minds also of complicated countries rather than imposing sanctions that sometimes are then difficult to lift. Obviously, you need to have improvements on the ground before you move in a positive direction. But I would say that these are probably the strongest instruments that especially the European Union has in its hands. And let me say, as you're from Kosovo, and it's a country I know well, and you know that my heart has been a lot in the Balkans and still is a lot in the Balkans, and I hope that I will manage to help a little bit also from where I am now. I think that in the Balkans in particular, the European Union has a great asset if the Union is able to use it properly, and that is the accession process. I don't say enlargement because I'm personally convinced that on the Balkans, it's not an enlargement process. The Balkans are already inside the borders of all European countries. So we're not enlarging the Union, we're actually filling in a gap that at the moment is a blank spot on the European Union map, but it's already inside the territory of the European Union, and we realize it when we need it. We realize it when we have to face the refugee flows, we realize it with COVID, we realize it with security threats, that it's already inside, but not institutionally. I think that the most powerful instrument that in particular the European Union has when it comes to the Balkan countries is the credibility of the accession process to the European Union. And personally, I'm more than convinced that it would be extremely beneficial for the European Union, and I think also for the Balkans, to have the Western Balkan countries inside the European Union soon rather than late.
On the question of Kosovo, I think one of the credibility tests for the European Union of being a strategic autonomous actor in foreign policies is its ability to manage its own neighborhood. Its ability to build trust, peace, bridges in its own neighborhood. And this is a key test for Europe, and Europe needs, and the European Union, needs to understand that. Whether it's in the relationships between the European Union and the neighbors, or in the relationship that the neighbors need to build. This is the case between Pristina and Belgrade to restore a set of relationships that will make this region autonomous, and through becoming autonomous have an ability to manage its affairs autonomously also, not necessarily depending on others that may have other considerations in mind and other ideas about why to be part of processes in the neighborhood of the European Union. Within the multilateral framework, are we doing enough to support those that are furthest from being in a position to respond to climate change, respond to poverty eradication, create jobs, manage migration, ensure a healthy health response to the pandemic? Are we doing enough? Answer, no. We're doing a lot, but we're not doing enough. So this is the sense of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is why we should never forget that in this discussion, and let me take the example of the pandemic, because I think it's a very interesting way for any citizen to understand why solidarity is not about charity only or mainly. It's about its own self-interest. If we do not help those that have no means to vaccinate their citizens, variants are more likely to occur in those places that at the end of the day are going to impact on us. So let's do this because we are self-enlightened and we understand that by doing this, we are all going to be better off. Finally, a consideration about geopolitics. Version 21st century. Some countries and some people are still obsessed with geopolitics 20th century. But we're not living in the 20th century. We're living in the 21st century. Version 20th century. It was about territory. It was about hard power. And it was a nationalist narrative. Version 21st century. It's not about territory any longer, or primarily. If you look at most of the threats that we are facing, starting with the threat and the risk number one to our societies, which is climate change, it's not about territories. It's beyond territories, beyond the physical confines of states, which is what we need to understand in the 21st century. So first, it's not about territory It is first and foremost, if you want, about understanding that the threats are transnational, whether it's health, whether it's climate, whether it's nuclear. This is global. It's not territorial in the sense of nation states, it's global challenges. The second, which is about hard power, it's not only about hard power in the 21st century. You can destabilize a country without moving a soldier into that country. You can do this with hybrid threats. Look at what has happened recently between Belarus and Lithuania or Poland. You can do this by mobilizing, by instrumentalizing migration. You can do this by cutting the energy system of a country. So power in the 21st century is not just about hard power. It's a lot about new forms of power. This is why the answer in the 21st century cannot just simply build. It needs to, obviously, there is a security and defense component in military terms that has to do with equipping soldiers and weapons, but there is also a need to invest in resilience. This word that we use a lot, but we do not internalize enough in our systems. And finally, and this is, I want to insist on that, is on the narrative. The narrative that we will use in the 21st century has to be different. It's not about nations acting within their borders. It's about international cooperation. I'm sorry to come back to this issue, and I sometimes am accused of being too softy and too lofty. But if I look at the world in the 21st century, unless we understand this narrative and unless we advance this narrative, we're not going to have effective means to address these global challenges that a much more geopolitical world poses on us. And yes, of course, the big actors in the geopolitics used to be states, nation states. It's been like this since the Treaty of Westphalia many hundred years ago. But right now, actors in geopolitics are not just states. They're businesses, they are social medias, they are individuals. So it's a much more disaggregated version of power, which is why we have to build a much stronger means to address this through resilience.
Thank you very much, Arancha. We're going to have to end now because Federica Mogherini has to leave for another appointment in 1 minute, and obviously I want you to give the chance to say thank you to her, also to Arancha Gonzalèz, who of course is here with us on stage, to thank both of them really for a stimulating and really thoughtful discussion. I hope that it's been useful for you, and to say that the breakout groups, the panel discussions, which are due to start in 5 minutes, will start more like in 10 minutes time. So for those of you, just to remind, if you're going to the panel on protecting the planet and you want to watch it from a room, if you go to the 13 Rue d'Université in the Amphi Erignac on the 3rd floor, you can watch it there with your fellow students, although you can also watch it anywhere. The session on economic inequality is taking place in this building in the Génie de Clarence room, which is on the 1st floor, just inside the front door of the building. And in this space, in about 10 minutes' time, will be the panel on equality in cyberspace and AI fairness. So thank you once again to Arancha and to Federica. Thank you to all of you for being here, and on we go.
Thank you very much.